Hi guys, back for part two. All right, so differential heating and global winds. So here's what we're going to get into: how are winds made? Um, how do they affect climate? And how do ocean currents, how are they created, and how does that affect our climate as well? And then that creates different ecosystems. So these ecosystems live and thrive in certain climates. And so these winds allow for the climate to stay relatively the same, right? So differential heating and global winds. So what creates winds and what creates ocean currents? And these are very similar, just one happens in the ocean, the other happens in our atmosphere, right? So unequal distribution of heat. So because Earth, right, is tilted, let's say it's tilted, it receives sunlight directly towards Earth, but it receives it different times of the year, different positions, right? And because it is an unequal distribution of heat, then parts of the Earth that receive the most amount of heat are going to be hottest. And that hot air that is created in that area, so let's say the tropics receive the most amount of heat, right? So if they receive that amount of heat for a long period of time, that heat will expand. Okay, so now the wind is created. So that expansion is going to move north and south. I don't know if I've lost you. Right, so unequal distribution of heat coming from the sun onto the earth. That is going to allow these winds to occur. So we know that from other science classes, warm air rises and is less dense, and it also expands. Okay, so this area, the tropics, are so hot that the warm air that it exists in that area in the tropics is going to be less dense, and it expands. When it expands, it moves north and south. Okay, so it's going to rise because now it is less dense as well. And as the air rises, it's going to spread north and south. When it spreads north and south, it is going to lose heat along the way. The air remains moving north and south, but it loses the heat. When it loses the heat, it becomes cooler and more dense. So when it moves north and south, becomes more dense, it'll sink or fall, causing precipitation in those areas, causing a cooler climate in those areas. All right, so unequal distribution of heat. Warm air rises, it is less dense, and it expands. As the air rises, it spreads north and south, losing heat along the way. As it becomes closer, it will sink. As it becomes cooler, it will sink and become more dense. Air in the poles will also sink, causing a cooler climate in that area. So patterns of rising and sinking air will create circulating cells of air. So in this picture, what you see is the cells of air that is happening in these areas. So you see the cooler is rising, and then the hotter is circulating, becoming cooler again as it rises, and then as it sinks, becoming hotter. So much like a convection current, right? So as the air travels from places where it sinks to places where it rises, it creates winds. right? The Earth's rotation causes the wind to blow from west to east over both land and sea in temperate zones, and then from east to west over the tropics and the poles. So this graphic shows you the poles moving from east to west and the wind traveling west to east over those temperate zones. Okay, ocean currents. Ocean currents work a lot like winds as well. So ocean currents are driven and shaped by, number one, patterns of warming and cooling, by wind, and by like location of continents. So wind blowing over the ocean will create these surface currents. These will affect weather and climate in coastal areas. So the interactions between the hydrosphere and the atmosphere will shape weather and climate in coastal areas around the world. So these interactions also influence temperature, salinity that might affect marine organisms and communities. So these surface currents are going to affect the temperature and the salinity of the ocean. And in those areas, those marine organisms that live in those communities. So basically, if you have a pot of boiling water and you add some salt to it, the salt will dissolve. And as the water continues to boil, the salt will be left behind. That means that the water is going to become saltier and saltier and saltier as the water becomes hotter and hotter and hotter. So these surface currents will cool the ocean and will allow the salinity to maintain its stability. The salinity goes off to one, either too high or too low. It can cause major damage in those ecosystems to a lot of invertebrates and other animals that live in that ecosystem may not be able to survive those spikes in salinity. So ocean currents, winds, that is going to allow the salinity and the temperature of that area to remain the same. Regional climate. So regional climates are shaped by latitude, the transport of heat and moisture by winds and ocean currents, by geographical features such as the mountain ranges, large bodies of waters, and ocean currents. So what causes more rain to fall on one side of the mountain than on the other side of the mountain? So, oh my goodness, sorry, hold on. All right, so regional climate. What causes the more rainfall to fall on one side of the mountain than on the other? So you will have a mountain, and on one side of the mountain, you're going to have very dry area with not much rainfall, not a lot of trees. You see, it's kind of like a desert on the other side. But on this side of the mountain range, you're going to have a lot of water, a lot of precipitation. What is happening? What's happening is that the wind, surface currents, and the wind that is coming off of the ocean is rising. As it rises, it cools down, right? So the wind rises, cools, and causes it to condense, the water vapor to condense and become precipitation. So this rising of the cool air is going to cause rainfall on this side of the mountain. And by the time the clouds move over to the other side, there isn't going to be much rainfall. So drier area on the other side of the rainfall. So the trick is just that the wind that is coming off of the ocean that carries water vapor is going to rise, and as it rises, it cools down and causes those clouds to bring precipitation. All right, changes in climate. So Earth's climate has remained pretty stable throughout our recorded history, so human recorded history. Global climate has changed dramatically though. So remember that climate involves more than just temperature. It's not about the temperature. It involves the winds. It involves precipitation. It involves clouds. It involves the extreme weather events. Nicole? Hold on. All right, so Earth's climate has remained pretty stable. So remember, climate change involves changes in temperature, clouds, winds, patterns, and amounts of precipitation, and the frequency and severity of extreme climate weather events. So some non-human causes of climate change. Remember, we went over saying that we had human causes and non-human causes of climate change. So some of these non-human causes of climate change include changes in solar energy. So solar energy sometimes changes. The amount of sun that directly hits our Earth is different throughout the history of Earth, so millions of years. The variation of Earth's orbit. So in cycles of about 100,000 years, our Earth's orbit changes. Minusculely or not, that little bit of change does cause a climate change. Meteorite impacts. Okay, so there have been meteorite impacts that have caused a climate change on Earth. There was one that caused the extinction of dinosaurs. The changes in distribution of continents and oceans. So once we were Pangea, we are no longer Pangea. And so that distribution of the continents and the way that the continents have shaped are going to cause these ocean currents to be different. Ocean currents are shaped because of the continents. So depending on where the continent is, the ocean current has to move around that continent. So that changes the current and the amount of current that is flowing through. All right, mountain building. So mountain building is going to cause changes. Causes changes because, like I explained in the previous slide, if we have these taller mountains, the wind has to rise further before it gets to the other side of the mountain. The further it has to rise, the more chances of there being different climates, of there being snow, of there being precipitation, different types of weather and climate. All right, so mountain building does change the climate. It does not allow sometimes those surface winds to get to the other side. Maybe we have a very dry area on the other side of those mountains. All right, volcano activity. So volcano activity is going to change the concentration of these greenhouse gases. So from my previous slides, when we talked about these greenhouse gases, those included carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor. If a volcano erupts, that changes the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the concentration of those. And so what was no longer balanced, or what is no longer balanced because of the volcanic eruption, is going to cause a change in climate. All right, so results of past changes in local climate. We have had both warm and cold periods of time. So we've had the Ice Age and we've had hot periods of time as well. So the most recent was a cold cycle. Our Earth goes through cycles. Again, this is in one of those, in that episode that I was talking about, One Strange Rock. He does go over these cycles and he explains how the cycles occur. It's a very good show. So once again, go watch that. So most recent was a cold cycle, and that caused the last major glacial period, and that ended 10,000 years ago. So global climate will govern the regional climate. So we have a global climate, right? But then allows changes within that regional climate. And then in that regional climate, because of that regional climate, it'll allow certain plants, animals, and other organisms to survive in certain places. So the vegetation that is in that area is going to thrive because of that regional climate. The animals that live in that area that eat off of that vegetation is going to thrive because it is in that regional climate. So the regional climate basically governs or allows certain things to survive in its areas. So some changes occurred slowly enough that life could adapt and survive, which is evolution. So because these climate changes, some of these climate changes happened so gradually, a lot of things were able to adapt and evolve. Now, there have been 5 mass extinctions, and those 5 mass extinctions occurred and mark a time in Earth's history where climate change happened so quickly, so fast, that organisms could not survive. And so there was the extinction of the dinosaurs, for example. There have been 5 mass extinctions that mark. And so your textbook will argue that there is a 6th mass extinction closely approaching if we do not change our habits and whatnot because of climate change. So we will go over that. I believe it's the last lesson in this chapter. All right, so this is a slide where it shows your 5 mass extinctions. And I know we briefly talked about it in our evolution area or unit, but I just want to show you again what that kind of looks like. So 445 million years ago, 85% of Earth died. And here are some of the results and the likely causes. So likely caused by rapid global cooling and falling sea levels, so a cold period in time, and the coastal areas were destroyed, chemical reactions affected by the cold. The next one was a death rate of about 70%, so 70% of the organisms died, and that was 340 million years ago. And the causes were non-human as well, so asteroid impact, rapid global cooling. The results were local destruction from debris. Ocean life was affected by temperature. Then we have the next one, 95% of the organisms on Earth died, and that was 250 million years ago. Likely cause, volcanic activity, so an increase of methane, CO2 or carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Those greenhouse gases were causing this to occur. So rapid global warming, so a time of heat instead of cold. So the results were oxygen was removed from the oceans. So desertification of the land. The next one was 200 million years ago, and 76% of the population died. And there was also an increase in methane and an increase in carbon dioxide and rapid global warming. And then we had desertification, so making land desert, right? Making of the deserts. They also had frequent heat waves. The next one was a death rate of 80%, and we had that 65 million years ago. And that was caused by an asteroid impact, volcanic activity, falling of sea levels. The results were widespread fires, plants disrupted by global ash cloud, and nuclear winters. So those are our 5 mass extinctions. All right, so these questions will be posted as an assignment on your Canvas. So these are the questions that I'm talking about that you're going to answer as an assignment, and it's going to be titled Lesson 3.2 Review. So explain how weather and climate differ. Now that we've gone over this lesson, and you need to go back and read your book if you need to, or go back to these presentations. Figure out what's different from weather and climate, what makes them different from each other. A clue is time. All right, so how does solar energy and the greenhouse effect impact Earth's global climate system? Describe the factors that affect ocean currents. What are the factors that result in different climate in different parts of the world? Describe the different causes of climate change. How might the speed of climate change affect the ability of life on Earth to adapt and survive? All right, you're part 2 of your invasive species project. So again, this is a second part. Remember, your invasive species project is going to have several parts that you're going to piece together and create a PowerPoint on. So part 2 of this invasive species project is you're going to answer some of these questions. Try to make connections with your climate, the weather, the area in which they live, what zone or climate zone they live in, so that you can get a better picture of why your species is invasive and what does this mean to your environment, right? Where does your invasive species live? What is the climate like in that area? How is your species reliant on the regional climate? So if your regional climate changes, is that species going to suffer? Does it thrive in temperate, tropic, or polar climate zone? If there was a threat of a sixth mass extinction, do you believe your species will survive? Why not? Will it be able to adapt and survive in its new environment? All right, that's it. And so, hope you enjoyed my video. I'm sorry if they're boring. I don't mean to be boring. I love you guys. I'll see you next week. Bye. See you in office hours again. 11 to 12:30. You have questions, come see me in office hours. Bye.